Manson series. This is focused on the Manson family, but I tried to add a few interesting facts into this notorious case. So, by the end of it, hopefully, you learn something that you either didn't know or a different perspective on a very well-known case. Now, most of you know who Charles Manson is, but I'm gonna give you a little something in the beginning for those of you who are not familiar with the story. Just so you know, this guy was one of America's most dangerous killers. The guy was so charismatic that he was infamous for murder by proxy. So, he didn't use knives or he didn't use standard weapons. He actually used people because for some weird reason he managed to manipulate people to do what he wanted, and not in a very I don't know, like make them do it, but convince them to do it. Now, there are different murders attributed to the Manson family, and they all happen in a short period of time. One of the most famous murder happened in Beverly Hills, in the home of Sharon Tate and her husband, director Roman Polanski. This was on August 9th, 1969, and Sharon was 8 months pregnant. Her husband was away shooting a movie in Europe. Sharon Tate was becoming very famous at the time, a young actress that, it was getting more and more well known, and of course known for her husband as well. They were expecting their first child, and since her husband was away, she had friends that would come and go to keep her company. Now, Sharon, her 4 friends, and the baby would be dead by the end of that night on August 9th, 1969. This is the most well-known case not only because who they were, but because everyone panicked. This is a pregnant lady, a well-known young actress, married to a very well-known director. And then, as if that wasn't enough, a day later, Rosemary and Linola Bianca were killed. In 2 days, the total killing were 7. Up until this point, okay? There were attributed 9 murders to the Manson family. Now, to understand this craziness of a guy convincing somebody else to kill for him, I think we have to start from the beginning. Understand who Charles Manson was and where he came from. So we can, as different episodes go by, we can start some kind of a theory in our minds. Now, Manson wasn't considered a serial killer. He was considered a cult leader. We already mentioned that he was charismatic enough to convince other people to kill for him. But what is interesting is how was he able to convince normal, middle class people, and I say normal in quotes, to obey what he wanted them to do, or obey him. He was the leader of the deadliest cult in America. And I was watching this little, I don't know, what was it, an interview or something, where people were talking about what a cult is. Now, if Manson was the leader, what is a cult? What is a cult in your mind? I guess that's a question. Basically, according to this expert, the cult definition is very broad and people interpret it in different ways. But it's basically a religion that is based on another religion. But do not listen to the rules. Let me explain. Let's say this is a Christian cult, okay? So, the cult is basically treated as or referred to as a new religious movement that behaves like if it was a Christian movement, but the followers don't follow the rules of Christianity or even the Bible. So this is a new religion based on an old religion, but they do not obey the laws of the original religion. So, in my opinion, what they do is hide under the wing of an established religion to find people who would follow them, and then impose their own rules that really have nothing to do with how they attracted people to it. Now, these cults, they're in every religion. They have one. Judaism, Islam, Buddhism. You name it. There is a cult in each and every religion. It's almost like they're hiding. But there is also another branch of this cult, and it's the destructive cult, or what people or experts describe as a destructive cult. This is something that, and there's a definition for this, but it says that it systematically kill and harm others or themselves. That is a destructive cult. So, to be in that category, you don't have to go around killing people. If people are harming themselves because they're part of this cult, then yes, that would be considered a destructive one. Of course, Charles Manson's cult was a destructive one, which is important to understand before we go into the case itself. Also, you must understand that he was one of the first cult leaders, or at least to be recognized as one. Anyways, I think in America, I read somewhere that it was either the 50s, 60s, or 70s, somewhere around there, then when the since the beginning of time. The idea of a cult, it's just something that started to be labeled here in America around that time. Now, why did Charles Manson become a cult leader? I'm gonna go a little bit into his childhood, or what we know about his childhood, according to the research that I did. Now, he came from a very humble household, in a very religious one, if you ask me. His grandmother, Nancy Maddox, was not only a religious woman, but she was a fundamentalist Christian, which means that she interpreted the Bible literally. Which, by the way, in my head, that's kind of I don't want to say that's a cult, but it's, she was a Christian, but at the same time she interpreted the Bible in a different way. So she would follow her own rules, which is interesting, knowing that her grandson would do something that is not exactly the same because it was evil, but had something to do with that being under the wing of a religion, but at the same time doing it your own way. Now, Nancy was married to Charlie. So, Nancy and Charlie were his grandparents on his mom's side. Nancy and Charlie had a good life. They had a happy life in Ashland, Ohio, and they had their children, Glenna, Aileen, Luther, and Kathleen. That I'm going to call her Kathleen. I think it's Ada Kathleen. They had a pretty good life as a family. A normal one, quote unquote normal one. But in 1931, when Charlie died of pneumonia, everything changed, especially for Nancy. Soon enough, her daughter Eileen died of a chest congestion, and this was only a couple years later. So, this kind of changed Nancy and made her into a more religious woman, if that was even possible. She wanted her youngest daughter, which was the one that was still at home, to be good, to be a God-fearing woman, to use modest clothes and go to church and be interested in the Bible. However, Kathleen, she wasn't interested in following that path. Kathleen wasn't into being modest. She wanted to dress like the other girls and attend the parties like the other girls. Have a good time, and specifically not have to go to church. Now, Kathleen had a very strong mother. Nancy was very, I don't want to call her scary, but she wanted things her way, and she wasn't afraid of making a scene or going and picking up Kathleen from wherever she was. So Kathleen would go to parties in the next town over to avoid her mother making a scene. Now, she this was a different time. And Kathleen never told her mom, of course, about this guy in her life. She was keeping that a secret, but this guy was keeping a bigger secret. And he was hiding this double life that he was living with his wife. But in 1934, Kathleen got pregnant, told him about it, and he decided to leave her because he wanted to stay with his wife and wanted nothing to do with Kathleen or her son. Kathleen was very young at the time. She didn't want to be alone. She didn't want to raise this child by herself. And while she was pregnant, she met this guy by the name of William Manson. And they quickly started a relationship. He didn't mind that she was pregnant, and they quickly got married too. In November of 1934, Charles Mill Manson was born. At the time, Kathleen was 16 years old, and I feel like for her, giving birth to this child was a relief. She wanted to continue with her party life, and so being a pregnant girl wasn't really as fun as not being pregnant. So when she had Charles, she decided that she was going to continue that party life and would leave the baby with relatives to go out. And Nancy, her mom, was super worried about her. I mean, she would disappear for days with her brother, Luther. Now, this guy, Luther, her brother, he wasn't the greatest guy ever. And Nancy, Kathleen's mom, she was really worried about Kathleen hanging out with her brother Luther because she knew that Luther was not in the right path. And Nancy knew it deep in her heart that Luther was probably teaching Kathleen his way of making money, which is, or was, by stealing from people. And she was right. I mean, that is exactly what they were doing. Now, at this time, Kathleen is still married to William, but he got tired and he just couldn't take it anymore. I mean, Kathleen was not only disappearing, but he was suspicious. Well, he suspected that she was probably in some kind of trouble too. But really, Kathleen didn't love William. She didn't care that the guy was getting tired of her. And in 1937, William decided to divorce Kathleen. Kathleen, at that same time, was taking her baby daddy. Remember the guy that she met that was married and the father of her child? Well, she was taking this guy to court for child support. There was somewhere was in some kind of documentary that they explained that she didn't get much. I think she got $25 for child support. And to be honest, this guy was very clear that he didn't want anything to do with Kathleen or her son. He basically rejected Charles from the womb. I mean, since the time that he was in the womb. Now, I have to throw that out there because people that are somewhat familiar with this story are going to know this, and if I don't mention it, I think this is the perfect time, because now if we fast forward a little bit, well, quite a lot, because this was in May of 1969, which was before the other killings, okay? In Ohio, in Ashland, the detectives found a man stabbed to death in his home. The man was Charles Manson's uncle. His name was Darwin Scott, which was the brother of Charles Manson, biological father. So, some people have the theory that because of his dad abandoning him and Charles learning about it, it kind of ruined his, I don't know, self-esteem. I've heard way too much about this theory that because of that, he killed his uncle. We'll move on from that and we'll come back to it. But yes, this did happen, and it was in May of 1969. So it was before the other murders that I mentioned in the beginning. However, this was in Ohio and not California. Now let's go back to the childhood. In August of 1939, when Charles was only 4 years old, his mom, Kathleen, and his uncle, Luther, they came up with the idea of stealing from this man. They were gonna go to this bar, nightclub, I don't even know how they called it back then, and they started to drink with the guy until they were drunk. And then both of them lured this man to a gas station and then assaulted and robbed him, basically. Now, Kathleen and Luther, I don't know how they were getting away with this because they were not the smartest criminals. They got caught pretty easily because, I mean, they didn't even cover their faces. They hang out with the guy. Hello. Of course, they were going to be recognized. So, here is when things changed a little bit. Because according to this, Charles Manson, being 4 years old, witnessed part of this event, okay? He watched as the police was taking his mom arrested, and I am not even sure if he was around by the time that they were sentenced. But in the fall of 1939, now he's not only witnessing some of the crazy things the mom did, but now he's going to be one of those kids to go visit their parents in prison. I am not gonna get into that because I understand that it's a different. There are so many different cases and so many different reasons why one can go to jail. But this is just part of the story that you should know. So, the person that could take care of Charles and that lived closer to that prison where she was the older sister, Glenna. This is Kathleen's sister. She was married to her husband Bill, and they had a daughter who was 8 years old. Her name was Joanne. Again, they lived the closest to the prison in McMegan. Probably butchering that. Can barely understand my handwriting when I have to look for towns. That's kind of tricky. This was a small middle class town, and most people work for the mines or the railroads. Just so you have an idea, this wasn't like a big city or anything like that. When he moved there, though, he started having lots of problems. By the time that Charles Manson was an adult, he was 5'2" or 5'3", I can't remember. I think it was 5'2". So he's always been a smaller guy. And when he moved there with his aunt, the other boys were all taller than him. And it was tough for him being the smallest. But this guy, he managed to be the center of attention and acted out whenever he was ignored. So he wanted that attention, and I feel like even the bullying was a way to keep him in the loop. Now, he got punished. If you're wondering, was this guy punished for being not the best kid in the world? Well, according to my research, he got punished and he was hit a lot for bad behavior, which is something that it was okay at the time. And I guess it's spanking. It's not a bad thing still today, but not in an abusive way. He wasn't punished that way. Just so you know, because I feel like there's going to be a lot of people that will have a different opinion on spanking. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that he got punished, sometimes physically, but nothing abusive, leaving marks or being something like they didn't tie him inside a closet and kept him there forever with no food or water. No, that wasn't the kind of punishment that he got. But let me tell you, Charles didn't care at all. He wouldn't mind getting punished. There was this documentary that was talking about how he started lying by the time that he was only 5 years old. And later on, he was described as being a pathological liar from that time, okay? And if he ever got caught, he would blame it on other people. He would never take responsibility for his own lying. Again, he was being bullied at the time for his size and for his attitude because he had a pretty bad one. Now, there was this incident where his incident, it kind of marked and showed him in a different light, so I think it's important to go over it. Now, Joanne was going to the same school, okay, at the time. Of course, she was 8 years old, and she was given the responsibility of keeping an eye out for her cousin. So, in one occasion, she saw this other boy beating up Charles, her cousin. So, she went and she couldn't stop the fight, so she bit the boy that quickly let go of Charles. The teachers could not believe it. I mean, she was a good student, a good girl, never gotten in any kind of trouble. So, Joanne explained to the teachers, hey, this is what was going on. I just wanted to help my cousin who was being beaten by this bully. So the teachers, of course, they go and try to confirm this story with Charles. But he lied, and he said that he wasn't really involved in the whole thing. By this time, the teachers knew that he was always lying, and of course believed her. But Joanne couldn't believe her cousin. This was just the beginning for Joanne, though. There's another incident when she was 10 years old and Charles was 7. I mean, just picture that. You're 10 years old. You have a cousin that you're watching over at school. I can only imagine how she felt after all this, but when Joanne was 10 and Charles was 7, Joanne's parents had to go out, and she was supposed to not only babysit him, but she was supposed to do chores. So, Charles and Joanne were supposed to start doing those chores, working on them. But he didn't want to, so he brought a sickle blade from outside that he found in the yard. And he started kind of bothering Joanne. And he wouldn't let her get things done. So she asked him to please stop. He wouldn't, so she basically kicked the guy out of the house and locked the door. Charles screamed and slashed the door. They had like a screen door. He slashed that with the blade. And according to Joanne, she was so terrified of him getting in at that time because he seemed like a completely different person. And I'm talking about a 7-year-old boy. She said that she knew that if she let him in at that time, she was afraid that he would cut her. So, I think that kind of gives us an indication that his behavior from the beginning was very scary. And according to experts later on, they realized that those are signs of a psychopath. Now, this is common in occult later, but it's not something that it's used. Those terms are not used for children. They are called callous children or unemotional children. They do not call them psychopaths. So, if you ever hear that this is a callous child, or this child has no, he has unemotional traits, well, that's what it means. Signs of being a psychopath. And psychopaths are 3 times more likely to become a criminal. And sadly, they do not respond to punishment because they have their brains wired in a different way. But I have a full podcast episode talking about sociopathy and psychopathy. What are the differences and what I think about it. But if you want to check that out, I'll have a link down below. However, let's just explore some of the signs, shall we? So we can kind of see if, up until this point of his childhood, if Charles was showing any of the signs. Okay, one of them is aggressive narcissism. Pathological lying, check. Tendency to charm or manipulate others, check. And of course, for personal gain. Failure to accept responsibility, check. Impulsivity, check. Irresponsibility, check. Lack of empathy, you think so? Check. No emotions, maybe. It's not 100% clear, but it seems like it. And they can't control their temper, check. They get easily bored and seek stimulation. Some others are, when they grow up, is that they leech off others. They don't like to work. They want other people to support them. And of course, most of these kids later on become criminals, according to this research. So, definitely, he had these callous traits. We're not call it psychopath traits because he was a child at the time. But we have to be very clear in this. He had no mental illness. And this is something that I briefly touched in a previous video. But there is a misconception out there that all serial killers or spree killers have a mental illness. But there's this study, I want to say that it's from Stanford, but I can't remember, that says that serial killers, they studied 200 mass murders, that's how they are described, and only 25% showed paranoid schizophrenia, which, by the way, according to this expert, if you diagnose paranoid schizophrenia, you treat it and you take your medicine, more than likely the killings that they committed were 100% preventable. Sadly, this 25% of people could not control themselves because of that illness. But it's only 25% of them. The other 25% showed signs of depression and psychopathy, or unemotional traits, if you want to call them that way. And then the other 50% had no signs of a specific quote unquote regular diagnosed mental illness. There are some things that I want to say before I move on to some of the specifics to kind of explain why they have no signs of a specific diagnosed mental illness. In my opinion, there's a lot more mental illness things that are not really studied enough, or Because really, what makes them different from the rest of the people? If 50% of them had no signs of a specific diagnosed mental illness, does that mean that they're just evil people? Does that mean that anybody is capable of becoming a serial killer? I mean, really, what makes them different? According to this research, mental disorders like narcissism and paranoia, they don't qualify as a mental illness, but narcissism and paranoia are very dangerous as well. So, it kind of debunks the idea that every serial killer has a mental illness, which I'm glad it does, because, well, I'm glad and I'm not glad. Let me explain. I'm glad that it does because I feel like a lot of people with mental illness are scared of talking about it because of the way that people are going to look at them that way. If you have a mental illness, then you're capable of doing horrible things like this. Well, not in every case. And at the same time, I always want to explain why people do these things, because of this that happens in their mind. You know, people that are capable of killing their entire family or just killing people, period. I always want to believe that there is something that they're wired differently, that there is something in their mind, there is a different chemical, or there is a different substance that makes them able or enables them to do that, and not the rest of the world. As I always say, I mean, most of the cases that I share with you have a reason. You know, a husband that was jealous, greed, you know, a wife that wanted the money, or hiding a secret, you know, maybe sexuality related. But in the end, a lot of people have those problems, you know. Maybe you are gay and not being accepted, like some of the cases that I share. Maybe your husband is a cheater, but you divorce him. You know what I mean? Maybe you want to have your husband's money, but you never thought of that crazy idea of getting rid of your husband. Do you get my point? I want to believe that there is something different in these people that enables them to commit these crazy things, to even have the idea that most people would never even thought about. So in my mind, there is something different in their brains. I refuse to believe that it's something evil, that it's something supernatural. Can they be possessed by a feeling, by maybe something? Yeah. But I'd like to believe that everyone has a choice at the end of the day. And that the cases where people are like, well, I don't know what happened all of a sudden, and not every case, but there are some cases like that, where they say that, but there are others like, oh no, you know, like serial killers that plan the whole thing from start to finish, and then you start to wonder, are they in different categories? What so different in this different kind of criminals? Or what's the difference between this criminal and myself, or you, or your neighbor? How can some people have that thought? How can they even explore the thought of committing something so evil to fix a problem that it's so normal for most of the world? Just to finish this part 1, because we're about to get into the 1 hour mark, I want to tell you that Charles Manson had the symptoms of a psychopath, but according to this research, there are 2 different things that can make you into a psychopath. There's nature or nurture, and this is something that I think I heard over in a podcast that we're talking about that, but and let me explain, and let's finish with this because I can talk about this forever. Now, nature means that this child was born into that he was born empathetic, but grew up in a family that was abusive, that had no stability, and because of that, they kind of get unemotional to protect themselves from these things around them. According to this research, this is the treatable kind, because they were born empathetic. They were born okay. This is not something that they were born with. And overcoming these things that, they had to endure as abuse in this case, is something that can be done according to the expert. Now, the most dangerous one is the nurture, because these are raised in a loving home with loving parents, good neighborhood, good life, yet they lack empathy, just as abused children can develop. Now, these children, the nurture ones, according to the experts, their brains are wired completely differently. They crave stimulation and they lie. And to make things worse, if they show any kind of empathy, it's because they want something from you. Now you're wondering, is Charles a part of the nature kind or nurture? According to this research, he's both, which makes him more dangerous than laying in one of these categories. You see, Charles Manson was raised in a loving home, even though his mom was not there. So you can see the mix there. His grandma was a very religious person who loved him very much. His family that surrounded him while his mom was partying was very loving and tried to do the best for him, raise him as their own child when his mom went to jail. But see, he had that love from part of his family. But he was lacking the love of his mother. He was lacking the love of his father, who basically wanted nothing to do with him. So, in one hand, he was being loved by these people, and on the other one, he was witnessing different crimes that his mom was part of. So that's where the mix comes from. What can I say? Exploring his childhood, it's only the beginning. There's a lot of manipulation and there's a lot of different things that we're going to continue to see throughout this series. But now we have the basics of his childhood, and his childhood explained by science, by experts, and where he lays in that part of psychology. I invite you to come back tomorrow to listen to part 2. This is where things start to connect with his childhood. This is where things are going to start to make like a timeline, because makes sense. I don't think we'll ever can. I don't think if we would be able to understand. No, understand it's not the word. But connect the dots and start to get closer to one of the most notorious cases, but now with a background. Hopefully enough to give a different perspective. Thank you so much for being here today. Please join me tomorrow at 6 p.m.